Welcome to our podcast, A Novel Talk, co-hosted by Carl Lee, and I'm Wendy Kendall. I want to thank all the readers who've let me know how much they enjoyed my book, Cat. That's Cat with a K, Cat Out of the Bag. It's a mystery. Catherine Watson, an international purse designer and amateur sleuth, goes from designer bags to body bags when she's faced with a puzzling murder mystery in her hometown of Bayside. And the prequel is Purstachio Makes a Splash, where Catherine and Mayor Brenda Durling investigate a chilling cold case. Visit my website, wendywritesbooks.com. And here is your co-host.
Thanks, Wendy. My name is Carl Lee, and I write paranormal fantasy. My current project, Selfies, is currently under revision and hopefully will be with the publishers soon.
Yay! Can't wait. All right. Award-winning author Stacy Gold gave up her day job as communications director of a nonprofit mountain biking organization to write steamy romance novels filled with independent, adventurous women and the men who can't resist them. I want to emphasize these are steamy. When Stacy's not busy reading or writing, you can often find her enjoying the outdoors, extreme sports, or playing hard in the mountains with her husband and happy dog. Thank you for joining us on A Novel Talk with Stacy Gold. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to meet both of you, Wendy and Carl, and I'm just thrilled and honored that y'all enjoyed my steamy little outdoor adventure ski romance novellas, and very excited to talk about them or outdoor sports or all of the above.
Well, howdy, Stacy. I loved your anthology. I loved how the characters floated in and out of the three stories, but the setting, Emerald Mountain, remained constant throughout. A little bit more about that later. But do you find that people that work in a specific industry also flow in and out of each other's lives?
Well, I can't speak to all industries, obviously, but both my husband and I have worked in the outdoor industry for a very long time. And it's definitely a pretty small world with lifelong devotees. So people absolutely cross paths over and over again throughout their careers, and we laugh now because there's people that my husband worked in customer service with who are now the heads of companies or VP of sales or whatever, but all our paths just still we keep finding each other. You change companies and discover someone you worked with 10 years ago is there now.
Mm-hmm. I found that to be the case when I worked in the information technology business in Seattle, a very small, close-knit family of people that you keep running into.
Yeah, Seattle's that way for sure. I think in the IT and tech industry as well as the outdoor industry, they're like these little communities. But the outdoors is fascinating because people get spread out all over the country working for different companies. And of course, some people are working for companies like REI or Patagonia, and then there's, people working at rafting companies or ski resorts. And you'll still keep crossing paths at the big conventions every year. And it's really kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
Well, Stacy, you love the outdoors, and your Emerald Mountain boxed set trio surrounds the reader in a wintry mountain wonderland. I mean, I could feel the wind on my face, and I could hear the crunch of the snow. What is your secret to making the setting come alive off the page?
Well, some of the advice that writers hear a lot is that you should write what you know. And when it comes to writing about outdoor sports, that's very much what I'm doing. Whether I'm writing about skiing, as I did in these novellas, or backpacking or mountain biking, as I'm doing in some of my other books I'm working on now, I've been doing those sports for decades. And so when I'm writing those scenes, I literally close my eyes and imagine myself there in that scene, in that moment, doing that activity. And I really focus on how that makes me feel and what am I hearing and seeing and smelling. Um, so I can remember it and then translate that to the page.
That's really amazing the way you describe that, because it's like you're bringing emotion into the setting. And as you were speaking, I realized that I was getting that too. I was getting the emotion of just being there. It's really amazing, skillful.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks to your books, I want to take up skiing now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of making characters and setting come alive is selecting just that right word or phrase. Throughout all three of these stories were numerous examples. Do you have the right word in mind when you're writing, or do you place a word, the first word that comes to mind, and you adjust it during revision?
Well, first I have to say that I just love that reading my books makes you want to take up skiing, Carl. Um, and you're not the first to say that. I had a reviewer a while back who, growing up, all her friends would go skiing and her family didn't have the money. Um, and now I'm not sure how old she is, but she's definitely older, in her 50s or 60s. And after reading my books, she took her first ever ski lesson. And it just gives me like the goosies. It makes me shiver to know that I've gotten somebody else so interested in something I'm really passionate about and that brings so much joy. And that means I've done my job right as an author too.
That's inspiring.
As far as word choice goes, yeah, and I want it to be inspiring. So it's really awesome to me. And as far as word choice goes, sometimes I get lucky and I come up with that wonderful, perfect word or turn of phrase on the first draft. But I would say more often than not, I'm making changes and inserting more specific words and phrases during the editing process.
Yep.
I look at it really a lot like sculpting. You start with this big block and then you kind of carve it into something that more or less is the shape of what you're going for. And then you get in and you refine it and you strip out everything that's unnecessary and you highlight the important parts. And so, yeah, I'm a big editor.
And goosey, there's another example of you choosing just the right word.
Well, thanks. I got to give J-Lo credit for that one.
Your character, Taya, in Just Friends, is surprised by a chance meeting with an old friend of hers that she didn't even know had moved to where she is now living. Now, although Jordan had been a friend, there's a romantic tension between the two. What is it that's critical when writing about a couple who dance between friendship and love?
It's a great question. I really enjoy writing friends to lovers, partly because I believe that in a really good relationship, you're with somebody you're great friends with, or many somebodies, depending on the type of relationship you prefer. And I think a lot of the romantic tension comes from the dichotomy between the logic of why you believe you shouldn't be with this person and all the feelings you have when you're actually around them. You've got some good, solid, logical reason for not thinking it's a good idea to be in a relationship with them or maybe with anybody. But physically and emotionally, you've got these two people who really want each other. And so then their actions and their thoughts need to be in opposition for much of the book to create that kind of dynamic will they, won't they tension. They want it, but they know they can't have it. Oh, the anticipation, it kills me, right?
It does feel like that, like a push me, pull me kind of thing. It's it's an amazing way to write that. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
I'm obsessed with your word choice, your word choices, and part of those word choices are the great analogies that you use throughout. Like when Dan thought of her body fitting up against him, like a boot fits a binding, or all of Dan's cooking innuendos that he did throughout. Um, do you enjoy wordplay like that outside of your writing? Is that something that you engage in when you're just in casual conversation?
Oh, all the time. I adore wordplay of all kinds. It's one of the things my husband and I have always had a lot of fun with, especially because we've done a lot of road trips, and we'll just joke and kid and puns and snark and sarcasm and, again, dating myself, but sniglets, which were those, those
I know
are
what a
all,
sniglet is.
yeah, Carl, but they were a few books, a series of books of made up words that I just adored as a kid. And I actually have a girlfriend now who makes up her own words all the time. And about once a year, she'll send all of us writer friends a copy of her list of the latest ones she's come up with, and they just always tickle me. So yeah, I love rhythm and cadence and all kinds of things like that. I just find playing with words fascinating all the time in my regular life and when I'm writing.
Yeah, me too. I know what sniglets are, but I have no idea what snark is.
Oh, just it's a little more pointed sarcasm, or maybe you're being just a little more cutting or something along those lines.
Snark is a synonym for Carl.
There
Shh,
you
shh, shh.
go.
Stacy, that just makes me wonder when you're editing your work, because like you said that you notice the rhythm of the sentences and the words and stuff, do you read your work out loud when you're editing?
I do sometimes, not as much as I used to years ago. I spent 15 years full time as a copywriter and a journalist.
Oh, wow.
And I used to read that work out loud a ton. Um, Now I've kind of just got my voice in my head.
Yeah.
So I don't do it as often, but if I hit a sentence or a paragraph that just for whatever reason raises a red flag, it isn't working for me. When I read it, I don't read through it smoothly. Then I'll read that out loud and work to figure out why it's not working the way it ought to.
Interesting. Well, I love your technique of writing in each of the romantic protagonists' point of view. It is so much fun reading the thoughts of each of the characters in turn to the things that the other character is saying, and also to the action that's taking place in the scene. How do you consistently keep such distinct characterizations? And also, do you have a favorite point of view to write in within the trilogy?
Um, yeah. So keeping them distinct is something that I actually do a lot of focused work around. I spend a lot of time developing each character and their backstory before I start writing a book. And that includes defining how each character thinks and talks. Um, and I'll go so far as to be like, they would never use these words, or this person curses, this person doesn't. This person in their head is super verbose, but out loud, they're kind of the quiet person in the corner, and you'd never know they're sitting there thinking all of this. Um, I look at their background. Did they graduate from college or not? That might change it. So many things impact how we as people think and talk. And I really try and make my characters be like people. And thankfully, because of all my years as a marketing copywriter, I had to learn how to write in different voices, because if I'm writing about skis for REI, that's a very different voice than if I'm writing for a firm that handles internet security for
Oh,
government
yeah.
organizations. Um, so I had to really, come up with a strategy and a methodology for defining voice, and sticking to it. And I use a lot of those same techniques now in my fiction writing to define the voices, interior and exterior, of each of my characters, and that way I can stick to them throughout the book. And sometimes at the end of a first draft, I go back and I'm like, I can't tell the difference. So I look at my notes and I'm like, oh, right, I decided that he was going to be this way, and I didn't do that.
Interesting.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Well, part of that deep understanding of who each one of your characters is, and I love this about them, is how each of them have their own moral compass. Um, despite strong attractions, they try to hold each other. Try to hold themselves to their own moral north. Um, in Deep, can you talk a bit about how Max and Sophie's past created tension in their present? Without giving anything away, of course.
Sure. Um, well, those two are really fun
Yes.
because they're a second chance romance. And in fact, to speak back to Wendy's second question about do I have a favorite point of view to write in the trilogy, Sophie. I adore Sophie. Dan is
Mhm.
probably my second favorite, but
Oh,
um,
mine too.
yeah,
Yay.
yay, we're on the same page, literally and figuratively. But yeah, I am. The moral compass thing is really important to me, and one of the things I do is define everybody's core values. And those two, because they're a second chance romance, they had a steamy fling a few years before this story takes place. Um, and despite promising to stay in touch, Max basically ghosted her, and then they end up working together. And Sophie doesn't know what's happened. So there's this big elephant in the room in the beginning. And especially Max is one of those guys who isn't necessarily the first to come out and share his feelings.
Hmm.
And really, Sophie isn't either. So they find themselves working together, and they eventually are going to have to deal with this thing. And it just creates so much yummy tension in the story that I really
Yummy.
enjoyed it.
It's definitely yummy.
What do you like most about writing in the novella format?
you know, it's just so fast. And having written, for magazines and marketing copy for years, even if I wrote a long form sales letter, the whole thing was maybe 18, 20 pages for a really long one. Um, Writing a novel, just drafting it takes me about 6 months. And then I've got another few months of editing. Whereas a novella of this length, I can draft in like 2 months, 6 to 8 weeks, and then edit for a couple weeks. And I have this nice, satisfying thing, and it's done, and it's gratifying, and it's tight and it's clean, and it's nice to also offer people something to read that doesn't require a huge time commitment these days. So that's kind of fun about it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've written a few short stories and I've written a novella unpublished. Um, so I understand the challenge of building full lives for your characters while keeping the word count tight. How do you create these great, fully developed people within those constraints?
Well, as I mentioned before, I definitely spend a lot of time long before I start writing the story, just developing the characters for myself. I mean, there's tons I know about their backstory that nobody who reads the books will ever know, but it makes them real in my head,
Hmm.
which is really important. The other piece that I discovered that's really key is that in order to write short and have it be really full and fulfilling, you have to take anything extraneous out of the story. So in these shorter works, I'm not going to have much in the way of secondary plots or storylines. I do include a few key secondary characters, and they're the folks you're going to see in the other books, which I find really fun. I like the crossover. We get attached to them, and it's kind of cool to see them.
I like that too.
I've also found keeping the timeline short is really helpful. I try not to have these novellas stretch for longer than a few days, ideally, because, when you're talking about a story that goes over 6 months, well, you just need more pages and words for that.
What's the biggest challenge in writing the steamy part of the romance scenes?
Well, I'm one of the lucky romance authors who I've never really struggled to write the sex scenes and the steamy parts. The hardest thing is that you have to remember that it can't be all choreography. Like, I remember my critique partner would be like, yeah, so this has gone on for like 3 pages and there's been no dialogue. I'm like, oh. Maybe I should break this up a little bit. Yeah, otherwise it just kind of gets long and boring, and it just becomes like a bunch of movements and choreography, and it needs to have emotional impact. My books may be quite steamy, and the sex is definitely graphic and on the page, but it's there for a reason, and it's always designed to move the plot forward or let you know something about the character or cause a shift in the relationship. So it's making sure I include more than just, tab A into slot B.
It's definitely more than that on these books.
So, Stacy, can you tell us a little bit about your current work in progress?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks so much for asking, Carl. I've got a couple things going on right now. I have my agent is working right now on selling a 3-book series of steamy backpacking romances to a major publisher, and I'm really excited about these books. The first one is, if you remember Cheryl Strayed's book Wild, from quite a few years ago, and then Reese Witherspoon made it into a movie. I think of this as sort of a gender-flipped romance version of that. In Wild, the woman, her life is a shambles, and she decides to hike the Pacific Crest Trail with no experience. In my book, both characters' lives are kind of in a shambles, but the woman has a lot of experience, and the man less so. So she ends up kind of coming to his rescue a couple times, which I had a ton of fun with. And then I'm also currently in the process of what I'm hoping are going to be the final round of major edits on a kind of lifelong best friends to lovers mountain biking romance set in a small outdoor sports town that I've created here in Colorado, with the intention of doing lots of different books all based in this town, kind of the way I did with Emerald Mountain, one setting, different main characters that cross over as secondary characters in other books. And it's that best friends to lovers thing again, because it's just so juicy.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. Speaking of juicy, would you be willing to read an excerpt from one of your novellas for our listeners?
I would be most honored to do so. What I would love to read is Chapter 1 of In Deep, which is the second novella in the series, though you can read them in any order. It really doesn't matter. And it's just one of my favorite openings that I've ever written. So at any rate, here goes. The wooden door of the ski patrol shack slammed into the wall. A gust of cold air and snow and a tiny, powerful tornado swept into the room. The door slammed shut, but the tornado kept coming. What is your deal, Max? Sophie's ski boots thudded on the plywood floor as she crossed the sparsely furnished room. Voice hard, eyes flashing, all the fury of a goddess scorned aimed straight at me. Shit. I crossed my ankles like my family jewels needed protecting. Not that anything could save me from Sophie's well-justified wrath. What do you mean, Soph? I kept my face and tone innocent. I hadn't wanted this damn job. Knowing she would be working for me would have been the nail in that coffin. Too bad I didn't find out until my first day. You know good and damn well what I mean. She pushed her way into my personal space, so close I could see the darker lines in her light blue irises. So close it made it damn hard for me to think about anything other than the taste of her mouth, except maybe how it felt to have her naked and in my personal space 2 years ago, before we worked together, before we lived 2 doors down from each other in employee housing, before I became her boss. I really didn't need the reminder of those 8 incredible weeks we'd spent together, or the stiffy responding to the images in my head, not when I wanted to think clearly. Anger radiated off her like the sun's heat radiates off the snow, hot and able to burn you in minutes. If I wasn't leaning my hip against the battered wood table, I would have taken a step back. Instead, I worked not to cross my arms. Setting up physical defenses wouldn't help me here. Sam said he hired me because he wanted someone who was mountain travel and rescue certified. She put her hands on her hips and glared at me. It's been almost 3 months, and all I'm doing every day is sweeping easy groomers, working first aid, and repairing fences. Standard procedure. You'll learn the mountain and the team before we send you out on serious rescues or avalanche mitigation work. I picked up a clipboard of paperwork I didn't need to look at and stared at the top page. I never expected my strategy to work over the long haul. Not after she left a sweet job patrolling at Blue Sky to work for Emerald Mountain. I just didn't know what else to do, and I had to do something. She crossed her arms over her chest. Bullshit. Troy started when I did, and he's been throwing bombs and ski cutting with Ryan for 6 weeks. Her lips pursed. No wonder you don't have any other women on patrol. Not true. Britt's on maternity leave right now, but she's slated to come back next season. And do you let her do anything other than repair fences? She raised her eyebrows and stared me down, shoulders back, arms crossed.
Thank you for the reading. I can see why that's one of your favorite openings. It's very, very tense. You can enjoy more about Stacy and all of her current upcoming books at stacygold.com.
Yes, and thank you so much, Stacy. Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, and I'd love for people to visit, and if they want to stay up to date on what I've got coming out, as well as hear about all my fun outdoor adventures, they can join the Gold Club while they're there.
Oh, nice. The Gold Club. That's great. I'm encouraging our listeners to grab a steaming cup of their favorite beverage and enjoy the read, because I also understand, Stacy, that you are a tea lover like I am too. I enjoy all kinds, but especially very black and very caffeinated. My favorites being chai and Earl Grey. I can go through 2 pots of tea in a day, especially when I'm writing. What is your favorite tea, and what is your favorite tea when you're writing?
Well, my favorite tea is always the hot cup I have in front of me. I drink pretty much, I drink all kinds of tea depending on the time of day. I'm herbal at night. I'm green tea usually in the afternoons, but much like you, I'm an Earl Grey with a little coconut milk and a splash of honey. My family is from Switzerland, and every time I go over there, I got hooked on black tea with cream and sugar. And the last time I came back, I said, I'm not giving this up. I really like it. So most of my writing is powered by Earl Grey.
I like Earl Grey, but I'm more of a coffee kind of guy. I like my coffee strong and dark. No cream, no sugar. Well, hot or cold, I'm okay either way. But Earl Grey, I like Earl Grey too. I've been known to have a cup or two of Earl Grey. I peeked around my monitor. I used to have a box of Earl Grey that I had unpacked on my credenza behind my monitors. So
Keeping it close is important.
I think I emptied the box, which is why it's not there anymore.
Well, thank you to our listeners for tuning in. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And remember, a novel read leads to a novel talk.